Good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent. Hope you enjoyed your 3-day weekend. For those of you with family members who have served or a few years yourself have served, thank you for their service, and hopefully all are home safely gathered in. Today, we are diving back into the news, back into politics, back into the regular cycle. It's like everyone took a deep breath over the weekend. Now we're back. From The Independent, we have the following headline: Biden laughs off the idea of a Trump pardon after DeSantis pledges to consider it. President Joe Biden on Monday scoffed at the idea of granting his predecessor, former President Donald Trump, a pardon, absolving him of any crimes he may have committed during or after his presidency. This is a brief article, so I'm going to pull out a few key things and we're going to jabber about it. Mr. Biden was asked if he considered a reprieve for Mr. Trump as he departed the White House en route to his Delaware home on Monday, the day before the 8th anniversary of his late son Beau Biden's death. It's interesting framing, and I just want to cover this real quick. It's not really the main thrust of the article. Monday was Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a holiday, everyone agrees, is set aside to memorialize those who have given their life in service to their country, or those who have served. And that's a wonderful thing. The reporter is identifying the timing of the question in relation to President Biden's son's death 8 years ago. Beau Biden was a veteran. Beau Biden served. You could tie that back to Memorial Day if you wanted to do and make it generalized. But I guess maybe if you want to make President Biden as sympathetic as possible, you can point to something sad that's happened in his life, his son's death. Odd framing. I can't put my finger on it. Anyway, he laughed it off and said no. He's not even going to consider it. The interesting thing is right now, President Biden says, no, I'm not going to pardon him. But in 2015 in a town hall, Biden said, absolutely, yes, I commit. Then he says, of course, that the question whether to prosecute Mr. Trump is a hands-off completely because the Attorney General is the people's lawyer and not the president's lawyer. Again, this is one of those funny little distinctions. The Attorney General is the people's lawyer. The Attorney General is The Attorney General is hired by the president, serves at the pleasure of the president, can be fired by the president. But you're saying that he doesn't do the president's will? Sorry, that's not how any of this works. Now, we do have an honest bit of reporting. This is actually true, and it draws a legal distinction that is useful in this conversation, and the reporter does it. Hooray! Scattered showers of journalism. Mr. Trump has already been indicted by a New York grand jury, but U.S. presidents cannot grant any pardons or reprieves for crimes prosecuted by state or local prosecutors. And that's true, and that is an important distinction. If you're discussing the topic of a presidential pardon, you're talking about specifically for federal level crimes. The twice impeached former president could face federal charges as a result of 2 investigations being supervised by a special counsel. And what are these 2 investigations? The investigation into his unlawful retention of national defense information and his alleged obstruction of that investigation, his role in fomenting the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Here's the challenge that I have when it comes to covering this kind of topic. President Trump, in his own person, is such a loaded topic of conversation that just by bringing up President Trump, you get people who bring all of their biases, all of their already held convictions, all of their opinions. They bring that to the conversation. So you're not starting from neutral. You're starting from, I love Trump or I hate Trump, and trying to have a rational conversation to critically analyze a particular news item in isolation kind of requires that you either disarm someone who's an ardent defender of President Trump and get them to understand that maybe he's made some mistakes, or you're trying to get someone who is, as the comments have in this article, one of the top comments is, Mr. Trump deserves nothing but to stand in front of a firing squad. In other words, that's a person who's approaching this news topic from the perspective that President Trump is a man who deserves death. You have to talk that person off of that conclusion in order to open up a conversation like that. And that's one of the challenges that I have. I mean, President Trump is newsworthy. He's the leading candidate in the Republican primary. He could be president again in another year and a half or so. That is a potential possibility. So we can't ignore him. But when you talk about him, You get people who come in and just want to punch you in the face because you don't agree he's the Messiah, or want to punch you in the face because you don't agree he deserves the death sentence. There's a lot of room, there's a lot of real estate between those two poles. But there's so many voices that loudly shove him one side or the other that it makes it very difficult to really have this conversation. Nevertheless, we will try. First layer, why are we talking about a pardon? That's a nonsense question. I might even call it a gotcha question, because it's something that the media does to try and control the narrative, particularly in a political context. So as an example, the media can choose what the news cycle is about by choosing what questions they ask. And similar, a classic example of a gotcha question is, when did you stop beating your wife? No matter how you answer that, it can be spun to implicate your character one way or another. And by choosing what question you ask and how to phrase it, now you have the news cycle for the next little while. Why is the media choosing to ask the different nominees whether they would pardon President Trump? There are no charges for him. There's nothing to pardon him for. It is a theoretical, it's a hypothetical. And a lot of Republicans, a lot of political nominees, on principle, don't answer hypotheticals because it enables the media to control the narrative about your campaign. It's a smart political move. Say, listen, we will deal with that. In the event I'm president, we'll deal with that. In the event the charges actually surface, then we can talk about that. Until then, we're just going to let the justice system do its thing. As a political candidate, that's a great way to handle it, because you just bypass the rhetorical trap. Now, I think it's interesting that in this article, they say Ron DeSantis pledged to consider pardoning Donald Trump, but they don't quote him on it. They don't provide any context about when that happened. And I haven't gone and dug it out on my own, but when you get a reference without a quote, it usually means that there's something twisted. There's something there where either the context is not what you'd expect, or the way it was phrased is different, or there's a certain degree of supposition or assumption, and there's not a clean attribution, and so you just refer to it kind of in the abstract. Ron DeSantis is a savvy political operator. It seems unusual for him to make what looks like a misstep. It makes me wonder if maybe there is some sort of malattribution or twisting of words. Maybe I'll go dig it up and see what I can see. Anyway, so one, why are we talking about pardons? This is a hypothetical. There are other things of more concern. I was actually really surprised that there weren't more topics about some of the shootings that took place in Florida over the weekend. I thought for sure that would be what would be leading Reddit. Not a whisper of it, from what I could see. So I guess we'll talk about that another day. Maybe sometimes there's a delayed reaction. Referencing pardons, recognizing that while President Trump has been indicted in a couple of places, and maybe indicted in a couple more, those are all local charges, state or county charges. Nothing federal pardons even relate to, as the reporter agrees. And so what we're really dealing with is the only possible reason, the only justification to bring pardons into the conversation is the two investigations referenced in the article. One regarding his handling of documents, Mar-a-Lago, and the other regarding January 6th. We've gone into Mar-a-Lago in detail in other videos. We will just briefly summarize it. The sitting president of the United States has plenary power to declassify and classify documents. He doesn't require approval from another board. He doesn't have to follow another process. It's more effective if he follows standard processes. For instance, if you want to classify something, then you need to control the flow of that information. And it's helpful to control the flow of that information if you operate within the framework of the bureaucracy. You can more effectively be assured that the information you're classifying is going to stay classified. But in regards to declassification, by everything I've seen, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I just pay attention, by everything that I've seen, the president can choose to have a document declassified at his will and pleasure. He doesn't have to follow a process. He doesn't have to get approval from a bureaucracy. He doesn't have to go to anyone who, by the way, constitutionally gets their authority on these matters from him. He doesn't have to go to a subordinate to get approval to use the classification and declassification authority that resides in his office. That's not how this works. If you start from that premise, If you don't agree with that premise, feel free to argue with me and show me where I'm wrong. I don't see this as even a gray area. Presidents get to do this, and by practice have done this a lot through the years. We can give a lot of examples. But if you accept that that is the case, and you take President Trump's perspective, where he has said he declassified the documents at Mar-a-Lago, there are no classification issues that follow on after that. There's no handling of sensitive information that follows on after that. The National Records, National Archives and Records Administration, or whatever it's called, they can get their panties in a twist if they want to, but there are no criminal charges associated with whether or not Donald Trump gives certain declassified documents to an archivist. That's not criminal at all. If there's no criminal investigation, you can have no charges relating to obstructing the criminal investigation, because the investigation is unfounded and essentially doesn't exist from a legal perspective. This is a non-starter. Please show me where I'm wrong. But I don't even know why we're bringing this up anymore. Should be a dead issue, other than it's politically useful to the left. So we keep it alive. The second issue with January 6th. January 6th is a mess of an issue. We haven't gone into it in really great detail on this channel. What I will say is this. In order to attach some kind of criminal behavior to Donald Trump, I think you need to prove that he called for violence. I think in order to make any kind of charges related to January 6th stick, thereby needing a pardon, you would need to show evidence that Donald Trump personally spoke or executed plans that led to violence on the Capitol and threatened the function of the government. I've reviewed a lot of the evidence that they proposed. I don't see that there. I see him telling people to go home. I see him prior to it saying, make your voices heard, protest peacefully and patriotically. I see him calling for a variety of legally defensible actions. For instance, creating the constitutional argument of what the vice president's role is in certifying the election, discussing what the options are available there, discussing the options of states rejecting various slates of electors or sending alternate slates of electors or whatever. We have rarely had clear-cut case of fraud in a presidential election, and so we don't have a lot of legal precedents here. But if you take a step back and you ask yourself the question, what would you do if the election was fraudulent? 2024. Let's take the future. 2024, a big semi rolls up into Pennsylvania, and another one rolls up into D.C., and another one rolls up into Wisconsin and Michigan, some of these swing states, even California. Big semis emblazoned with MAGA roll up to a variety of vote counting centers. And on camera, you roll them up and there are crates and crates and crates of votes. And those votes get added on camera, even though people are protesting. Let's make it crazy. Let's say that there were armed people who basically took possession of these counting centers and brought in trucks filled with their own votes and ran them through the counting machines and then proclaimed President Trump is the winner. What are your options there? If you have someone who has won the Electoral College, even by obviously fraudulent means, you can't really file a lawsuit about it. I mean, look at Carrie Lake. She has filed a lawsuit in relation to her election contest with Governor Hobbs? I'm not sure. Anyway, in Arizona, the governorship. She filed this immediately. She's proceeded and pursued it with vigor. And it's a year and a half, almost 2 years later. No longer than that. It's 2+ years later. And now it looks like she's appealing to the Supreme Court, which means we've got a ways to go before this gets resolved. How do you deal with a fraudulent election when the wheels of the court system take way too long? You can't leave the former candidate in office. By the Constitution, the new candidate needs to take office on a certain specified date within weeks of the election. Within 10 weeks of the election, you have to have the new candidate sworn into office. So if there's clear fraud, what are your options to redress? How do you fix this? That's the situation President Trump found himself in. He believed it was fraudulent. He tried a variety of ways to challenge the election on the account of it being fraudulent. He ran out of time. He lost. The world moved on. The new candidate was sworn in, and the wheels grind forward. But it is not illegal for him to contest the election. It is not illegal for him to disagree with the election results. It is not illegal for him to pursue options of redress where he feels that something was done fraudulently. What is illegal is to call for violence. I don't see anywhere where they can prove he called for violence. So it's a non-starter. So why are we talking about pardons? Anyway, got to get to work. I appreciate you all. Have a wonderful day, and good luck out there.